So from an early age, we were told the Northern Pho was the bad guy. We were indoctrinated early. So think of a bunch of kids around a campfire as the oldies told their story or propaganda. Hanoi, tremendous. Loved the city, hated the pho. I thought it was bland. And it pains me to say this, I did not like the taste of it. Well, my entire life, I've been fascinated about Pho's older, badder brother, the Northern Vietnamese Pho. In my family, he didn't have a good reputation. So curious to find out what it actually tastes like, I flew to Hanoi, the capital of Vietnam and the birthplace of this dish, to find out, to taste my very first authentic Northern Vietnamese pho, to put to bed all the bad stories I've heard about this dish growing up as a kid. The first thing I did when I landed in Hanoi, went for a bowl. There, in a hidden alleyway in the old quarter, I finally got to meet this older brother. My expectations? The most perfect broth I've ever tasted. I mean, this is the original. Surely it has to taste good, right? The reality? Bland. Not just subtle, very bland. And I remember sitting there thinking I traveled all this way for this. And then it hit me. My aunties and uncles were right. Maybe this super authentic, stripped down version of pho is too authentic, if that makes sense. This store that I visited, atmosphere, vibe, everything about the bowl, 10 out of 10. It was the broth I did not like. And I want to be very clear on this. I'm respectful of the origins of this dish, but critical of the flavor. I thought it was bland. I find the Southern Pho suits my taste buds better. If you love Vietnamese food, guys, it's a rite of passage. You have to fly to Vietnam, experience a pho here. But be warned, if you're used to Southern Vietnamese pho like I am, there's a good chance you're not going to enjoy your first bowl in Hanoi. This is Southern bias, and you don't even have to be Vietnamese. You could be any race. If you're hardwired to the taste and to the ritual, you've got the hoi sin and the sriracha and the Thai basil, you, my friend, have Southern bias. But first, a disclaimer before we piss off the locals, which I'm not trying to do. I did not like this bowl. Doesn't mean I didn't like Hanoi. I'd never thought I'd say this, but I love Hanoi. I wish I had visited here sooner. There's a certain charm about Hanoi that Saigon doesn't have. It's a completely different vibe. I've been to Vietnam over a dozen times. It's usually only to the south. I wish I had come up to the north sooner to embrace my heritage. Hanoi, amazing place. And you know how you hear about this whole French influence on Vietnamese culture? Well, you don't see it any clearer than in Hanoi. But regarding the soup here, these are some of the things that I learned from this trip, the short version before we jump into the detailed. Number one, authenticity doesn't always translate to the best flavor experience. Just because this is the original doesn't mean it wins on taste automatically. Now, before this video, I had a Mexican burrito for lunch. And I thought to myself, as I was eating, If I flew magically to Mexico right now, is it going to taste 10 times better? If you flew to Mexico to eat this taco, would it taste better?
Yep.
Why?
It's the capital of tacos.
Yes and no. In my case, no. Now, prior to this trip, I've had the pleasure of tasting the best Northern Vietnamese pho restaurants in Saigon. I did this whole challenge thing 3 years ago in a video where I visited 10 pho restaurants in 24 hours. A crazy trip. So I'm familiar with the taste of a Northern pho. There's this notion where you have to taste it in its spiritual home. It's going to taste better in Hanoi. Simply not true. Yes, the scenery may change, the taste doesn't. To understand my verdict, you have to understand two things about me: my past and my palate. I was born here in Australia to Southern Vietnamese parents, but technically both my grandparents are from the north, which makes me a Northie by blood, but I grew up Southern. All the best pho restaurants that I grew up eating at in Bankstown and Cabramatta from my hometown in Western Sydney all sold Southern Vietnamese pho, Mian Nam. This was gospel. But there's one story in particular I remember. One of my uncles, he traveled to Hanoi for the first time since moving to Australia. He described Hanoi as the big bad city, but the pho that he had there was horrendous, the worst he's ever had in his entire life. His exact words: "Toan la bot ngon," fully loaded with MSG. And remember guys, back then there was no internet, there was no Google. Whatever the parents, the oldies, the aunties and uncles told us, we basically ran with it. There was no fact checking. So my entire life I grew up with this heavy bias towards the Northern Vietnamese pho. And the crazy part is I've never even tried it. Now here's the kicker to the story. You'd think by now, Leighton, set in his ways, Southern boy flying to the north, he's going to knock on the local cuisine there, say it's shit. That's not the case. I met a girl from Hanoi. A few of my ex-girlfriends are from there. I don't know what it is. There's an attraction I have towards the girls there. Maybe it's their accent. The relationship was an absolute train wreck at the end, but the most important thing I got from that relationship, I got to experience home-cooked Northern Vietnamese food for the first time. What this did, it broke down stereotypes one meal at a time. But perhaps the most important thing she ever did for me, she cooked a Northern pho at home in her home kitchen right in front of me, served it to me. This was a frying pan to the forehead moment. Remarkable. No restaurant I've ever tasted in Australia or Vietnam cooked a broth like that. It was so pure, so clean. Looking back, I really should have asked her for that recipe. But what this did, it changed me completely. I was awakened. I remember going back to my store the next day, took down everything. I redid my pho recipe, adopting this Northern influence hybrid Southern broth, taking the best of both worlds, if that makes sense, which I still serve to my customers to this day. So when I landed in Hanoi that morning, no baggage, not literally, no bias. I knew what a good Northern pho tasted like. I was ready to embrace this older brother. I have an admission to make. Maybe I picked the wrong spot. And I know the comment section be like, Leighton, you shouldn't have gone there. You should have went here or there. They do the best pho in Hanoi. I get that. But later that night, after church at the cathedral, a must visit by the way, we had bún chả, a fantastic experience, one of the best. But when it came to the nước chấm, the fish sauce and dipping sauce, bland AF. Again, This is when I noticed a pattern. This isn't bad cooking. This is the local palate. People here prefer a lighter, more subtle taste, a more under-seasoned flavor. So this is when I say, if you're used to the taste of Southern Vietnamese pho, you may not like your first pho in Hanoi. The only way to change that, maybe a girlfriend from there. And look guys, the last piece of the puzzle, I finally understand why my ancestors had to modify this dish when they moved to Southern Vietnam. 1954 is the year you need to know. History buff here. I was the best history student in my grade. I studied ancient, modern. This was the year people in Vietnam had a choice to move to the south or to the north before things kicked off. Those who know will know. We're not going down that rabbit hole. But people like my grandparents from mum's side moved to Vũng Tàu, next to Saigon, taking with them this pho recipe. Now, to give this story a modern twist, what I imagined happened, they cooked the pho, served it to the locals, started getting 1-star Google reviews. The chef was getting emails like this. Obviously, we know Google wasn't invented back then, but reviews like it's bland, it's tasteless, no flavor. So they went back to the drawing board, added more spices, more seasoning, and it morphed into the Southern pho we all know today. Look guys, despite the disappointment, it's a rite of passage, a must do. If you say you love Vietnamese food, fly to Vietnam and experience for yourself. This video isn't about saying don't try it. I'd rather you try it, knowing some of the things that I've told you in this video so that you're not surprised. Maybe your experience will be completely different from mine without all the history and the bias and the stereotypes that I grew up with. But yeah, you have to fly here and experience Hanoi for yourself.